excited to welcome our wonderful guest speakers for today. This is the team from Music Audience Exchange. We have our presenter Nathan Hanks, and let me get your names again.
Oh, Stephen Fulbright.
Stephen Fulbright and
I'm Victoria Yip.
Victoria Yip. So we have a wonderful team here that are going to be sharing their experience and more information about their company and their story. And I think this is the first time we are bringing someone from this part of the industry to our departmentals. I explained to them that most of you are classically trained musicians. Do we have any jazz students? I know Eric is jazz, but anyone else? Oh, okay, 2 jazz students. The rest are all classical. So I think this is going to be a very interesting opportunity for you to learn about another part of the industry. And we will have about 20 minutes of presentation, and then the rest will be open for Q&A, which hopefully we'll be able to keep our time this time because last time we went way over. But anyway, we also have the questions that you submitted on the discussion board, so we're very excited to welcome. Thank you for coming.
All right, well, hi, I'm Nathan. It's nice to meet you all. Everybody can hear me just fine? Okay, great. It's nice. I'm just looking at all these beautiful faces. Hello, 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 hello. And it's good to be in Denton. I made the long trip from Frisco, Texas. I don't know how many of you, by the way, I make a lot of stops and meet with a lot of people in music and business along the way because I have a lot of friends that are academics in the space. Been out to Berkeley, Berkeley and Boston, not the other Berkeley, and Northwestern, to the Entrepreneurship program, all bunch of schools. We did something with Harvard and Berkeley last year in Boston, but I've always wanted to come out and see the folks at UNT. This is where it all goes down, right? Right, Mean Green. Yes, what is it?
Screaming Eagles.
I knew he was Screaming. By the way, he's a Texas Tech guy from back in the day, so y'all welcome the boo. Huh? Yeah, and I'm from Southwest Louisiana, so you guys can give me a Bobby Boucher, you can do it. For any of you that ever seen The Waterboy?
Yeah.
Waterboy, yeah, lots of fans. And we brought Victoria. Victoria's a UNT grad. She's actually a musician, but went the business route, went through business school here. And I said, you got to come back to actually, you just moved from Denton, right?
I literally just moved out of Denton like 2 months ago.
And she's been working. Yeah,
Just down the street.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Right off the front.
So she is a local, and she's been working in the music space as a booker and in the festival business, and we picked her up to come work with us. We have about 70 people in the company. We're kind of spread out in the country, but mostly in Los Angeles and in Frisco. If you want to know more about me, I think there's probably a bio circulating, or you guys can get on Google and learn more. I want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing today. And then when we get to Q&A, maybe talk a little bit about careers. I know that one of the things that you're maybe thinking about, maybe not always thinking about, maybe sometime you should be thinking about your career, but maybe you're having a beer or looking at some of you, maybe something else. I'm just kidding, Dr. C. They're all Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts here. I used to live in Telluride, so I know all about what you guys are doing. Just kidding. We're going to talk a little bit about career too, because one of the things you got to be thinking about as a classically trained musician, or how many of you guys, by the way, classical, jazz, any jazz in here? All classical? We sell classical people.
Like 3 jazz.
Yeah. Some of you guys are just like, I don't know where the hell I am. That's a few on this side. We're going to talk a little bit about, we might even talk a little bit about what about careers after a music education, like what do you do? Because it's something I've spent a lot of time talking to young people about around the country. Now, my background is actually in tech, but I come from a family where on my mother's side, they're classically trained artists, and that's probably what always had music in the back of my mind. Just by way of background, I've worked in enterprise software, I've worked in marketing technology, I've worked a little bit around the Internet of Things space, and didn't really think about being in the music space. What really, but always had been in the back of my mind, the sort of plight of the artist, particularly around promotion. So if you think about how, and let's take a very quick, this is not going to be very fair to the music industry, but let's try to collapse, 50, 60 years of the music industry into like 30 seconds. The music industry has changed from one that was a consumer packaged goods industry. So think about the way you go to a store and you pick up a 6-pack of soda, or you pick up a frozen dinner or whatever. Music industry was literally that, like a record label made a sound recording, put it on vinyl at some point, they put it on a disc, people bought it, it had a high profit margin. And the marketing more or less looked like the CPG industry, with some exceptions. We could talk about publishing and radio and how that went a different route and why. But then, of course, all of that was sort of melted, if you will, by first Napster and then streaming, and the whole story of like Daniel Ek. I've got some friends at Coke that were part of that whole early days of sort of Spotify story. It's very fascinating to think about what had to happen for streaming to exist the way it does today, because the music industry is one that likes to kill its own young. Streaming has been its salvation. I mean, despite the fact that like music tried to kill the streaming, and the music industry tried to kill the streaming industry so many times. But what's interesting is through those tough times that music's gone through, and if you look at recorded music revenues in this country, they went down and up. 2000, they were kind of at a peak, and then went down and went back up, is that it were really lean times for marketing artists. And that was really a hard thing for artists to begin with. I think about my mother and my uncle as touring and working musicians, and how hard it was years back to get into like a 24-track studio, like what that was like to get into one with somebody who knew how to work all the equipment. Big deal. Today, now you got Symphony and you got Pro Tools and whatever else. Distributing music, CD Baby, one of my company co-founders who teaches at the Berkeley School, he was there at the beginning of TuneCore, for those of you that know TuneCore, right? If you know TuneCore, for distribution, solve problems, but promotion of music for artists is still really, really, really hard. And what's interesting is there's more music to promote because more people are making music than ever before. I saw a stat recently that like in the 30 years ago, there were like 500 like really high quality recorded albums that came out for the year. Last year there were over 1 million releases. So you have a million releases. So you have more releases than ever before, with more competition to promote them and more distracted listeners and music fans than ever before. Like that's a big problem. But let's talk for a minute about the marketing industry, because the marketing industry has its own set of challenges, particularly around advertising. Advertising is a very, very big business, very big space. Hundreds of billions of dollars worldwide a year, and there's an attention problem there too, okay? So I'm a good bit older than all of you. I'm 44, and I can remember, as a kid, like having to sit there to see my Saturday morning cartoons and watch a commercial. And then I watched my kids like watching programs, like I had to explain to them really like what a commercial was, and like when I watch live TV, it's like, why can't I fast forward that? It's like that kind of thing. They're still very small, okay? So, like, I had to explain my 22-year-old why I couldn't fast forward live television. I'm gonna get him with a joke at some point here, I promise you. I thought I was gonna get him on some pot jokes, but they were very mum on that. So big industry with an attention problem. Now here's something interesting to think about. So digital advertising in the US is something like 80 billion this year. Sports gets, depending on who you talk to, 20 to 60 billion dollars of investment from the marketing industry. Think about NASCAR, or think about NASCAR and all the logos, or any sporting event you see. What's interesting is music only gets a couple of $1 billion out of the whole marketing space. A lot of it is festivals and tours, the world Victoria came from. Very little around like direct sponsorship and promotion for artists. And the reason is the music business and the marketing business don't speak the same language. It took me a couple of years. We've been at this business just under 4 years. It took me a couple of years. Really, it was something Steve, our COO, said to me a while back that really made that click, that they don't speak the same language. Because in the music world, in the marketing world, you need standardized products, right? Marketers go like, I'm gonna give you money. Like, what am I gonna get? Where is it gonna show? How many people are gonna see it? How are you gonna measure it? Like, I don't wanna do 20 and 30 signatures back and forth with a music lawyer. I wanna use what are called the Interactive Bureau standards, so that I like sign a contract and we're all in the industry agreeing to the same terms around how this advertising is gonna run. And so what we saw was a combination to bring music and marketing together, to bring something together that was entirely new, that was great for artists to promote their music, but was also great for brands because it delivered ads the way that people look at advertisement today, which I'll show you. We like to call it brand new music, because those million releases that happen every year are artists trying to put brand new music into the world. And what we're giving brands the opportunity to do is to underwrite those experiences where people get to engage with new music from their favorite artists. And so we let them brand new music. Get it? It's kind of punny, right? Brand new music, brand new music. Okay. Still didn't get him on that one. I'm working on it. I saw a couple smiles. The lips are going this way. So I want to show you what this looks like very quickly, and then we'll tell you just a little bit about where we're going as a company, but hopefully this will just open your mind a little bit to what's going on from a marketing tech perspective around music. And I do think this is, in fairness, probably one of the more cutting edge things that's happening in music and advertising right now in the world. And it just so happens that we're here. I've spent a lot of my career working in California, but I live in Dallas. And the same way, by the way, that I know with this group there's a real pride to, I see it like with what music education could be in the state of Texas. I've got that about what tech can be in the state of Texas. So I'm aligned with you all in that way, and that's why I'm so happy to be here. So if you've ever been like listening to Pandora, Spotify, radio, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, and you see a piece of new music being delivered to you, and targeted too, where you go like, oh, wait a second, like how'd they know I like this music? Where the spot, the commercial, is more about the artist and their music than the brand, that's probably our stuff that you're hearing. And I'm gonna show you a very quick example of what that might sound like for a hip hop listener in Philadelphia.
Yo, Philly, it's Moosh and Twist. We hooked up with Coors Light to refresh your music with the best Philadelphia artists. Celebrate the sounds of our city with Coors Light and check out our new track, Whoa.
So imagine instead of a 60-second commercial on radio or streaming, this was delivered to you because our data tells us that you're gonna love this particular song. Brands are investing in this instead of a traditional commercial. And I'm gonna not run through the whole song here. Same thing for video content. So there are other people that make video content that you might think is ours, but you've probably seen this before where you see these sort of documentaries about new music releases brought to you by a brand. This is an artist named Matt Carney. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Matt Carney. He's a photographer, just put out a song that's I think a pretty nice size hit called Kings and Queens. Releases the music, Canon camera underwrites all of the promotion around the release. And the audio's not coming out loud here, but
I probably wouldn't be a musician
On the left
freshman photography class. It was kind of the start of my whole creative journey. And I had a teacher that handed me a camera, and I went out and shot a bunch of images, and she said, you need to pursue something creative. For me, creatively, music is images. It's very like, I love to write kind of pictures. And that's kind of how I see the world and how I see songs. There'll be in my brain, there'll be this movie.
so I'm going to stop here for time, but you get the idea. He launches into the story of like how he wrote Kings and Queens and actually performs the song. So why do brands do this, and how do we put these things together? Why does this require technology? So I'll try to give you a very quick tour of this. And we do all of this in what we call the Max platform. So, like any great user experience, there's all these tools that people in our company, like Victoria, there's really 3 main teams that work on these deals. There's sales teams that put them together, there's a bunch of teams. But sort of the factory of this is we have to match a brand to an artist for campaign. So Victoria is like the lieutenant on the team that does all that matching for us with artists and brands. We also have another team that makes all that content. So we have this network of video and film producers outside of our company that we work with that make all this content, all the systems that we use to host it and track it. And then we have all the connections into the Spotifys, the Pandoras of the world, the Facebooks, so that we can deliver the right message to the right person in the right place at the right time. We're not gonna get to go through all of that today, but I'm gonna show you a little bit about what happens in the matching part of the business, because I think it's interesting for people to see. And as artists, you probably go like, what type of music goes with what sort of brand? So I'll show that to you and explain to you how that has come about. By the way, one other thing before we actually get to that, I'll kind of put this low on volume and kind of show you. This is a campaign we did for Ford and trucks this year. The key for us is when we're doing a campaign,
What's up, y'all? It's Brantley Gilbert. Hey, I've been driving Fords my whole career, and it's
is
that
to
time
surround
again
the
for
customer.
The original, the one
here's this guy, and we're using some stock video to show this here, but here's somebody in, let's say, Texas, where they sell a lot of F-150s, listen to the radio, or streaming, or on social, or they're on YouTube, or they're at a live show. Our job is to hit, instead of a traditional ad banging on somebody over the head, to promote that music in all of those channels to those consumers.
For more, tap here or go to FordMusic.com.
And what's interesting too is that we're building more and more tools to be able to see when somebody does run that campaign, not only how many more vehicles does the brand sell, but how many more fans and streams and how much more in royalties and ticket sales is that going to mean to the artist, right? We're promoting them together. So let's talk about how we do a match. So one of the biggest projects or challenges that we had early on was to figure out if Ford is selling F-150s, we know that goes with country, but like what goes with Canon cameras, or what goes with craft beer, or what goes with, what goes with the luxury brands, what goes with Rolex, and what about by region? And they always want different audiences. So sometimes different audiences you have to reach in different ways. So one thing that we talk to the brands a lot about is the signal of music. So the gentleman in LA that runs the team there is a Harvard guy and a data scientist, and he spent his whole career looking at the study of music from a sociological point of view. And music is the #1 signal of identity, like in the world. Some of our early studies when we were setting up the business showed that if you and I like the same music, we probably feel like we're going to share values more than having gone to the same college, liking the same sports team, being from the same town, even being of the same religion. So when a brand says, here is music for you in place of an ad, not only is that a better experience, but it's the ultimate signal that says this product is made for you. So we had to understand, what does that intersection look like? And that's a pretty big question nobody ever asks. How does music move purchase behavior? So what we started by doing is cataloging every artist that exists in the world. We did that. That wasn't actually as hard as you might think, because there are people like iTunes that have records on this, and Discogs and Music Brains that have all these sort of open systems. But then our data scientists and our math PhD, our wizards, had to come in and say, of all these tens of millions of records, there's really only 1.8 million artists. Then we had to go look at every Wikipedia page and blog and social media page and official website, and pull and structure all that data so we know, how do these artists describe themselves, where are they from, what does their management look like. But then we had the emails of all the managers and the artists. We were able to go to the artists and say, hey artists, if you're looking for a brand partnership, you could survey your fans and we'll tell you what brands you should be looking for partnerships with. If you want to go out and find them yourself, we'll obviously want to help you. And then fans started taking surveys where they told us everything about why they love a particular artist. You may have taken these surveys before on Facebook or through email marketing for a band that you love. And they'll tell us, well, I love this band, here's how I describe their music, here are other bands that I like, here's what I listen to. I love classical music, but I like to listen to Drake when I'm on the way to the gym. And I listen on Spotify, and I'm subscribed, and I'm an Android user, and how much money I make, and what languages I speak, and what kind of education levels I have, what kind of products I buy, and they do it because they love the bands. We graph all of that, then we take zip code level listening on Spotify, Shazam data, the Twitter fire hose, all the other social signals that we can get, and purchase data, and we run it through what are called Python applications. We do big data, like programming for data science. And in some cases, we even run this through what we call neural networks, through AI, that says, how do we make predictions for every artist in the world in terms of how they match a particular set of brand attributes? These are the 200 attributes that we track. So if a brand comes to us, let's say it's a brand that is a fashion brand, and they all have really great insights on, I'm looking for women in California that like yoga and eat organic and vote progressive and, make X number of dollars, but they don't know how to reach them. So we can come into this system, put in some attributes, like in this case, luxury car drivers that are wealthy, that are between 35 and 59 and like to travel, and start to look at each particular of the 1,000 genres we track and go, what is it about this particular genre that makes it correlate to those consumer behaviors? In this case, by the way, no surprise, classical music shows up on the list because it so highly over-indexes with people that make over $150,000 a year. So the attributes can actually define where we look for a music perspective. And there's other cool things that we do too, where we can make predictions based on categories. So the other day I was sitting with a friend and we were talking about craft beer, and I said, of the 1.8 million artists in the world, who are the artists that most correlate with drinking craft beer? And the answers were the Decemberists and Ryan Adams, and you probably are familiar with both. If you're not, you should be. I happen to like them both. By the way, Decemberists, so I think, are playing here in a couple of weeks in the Bellum, I think. But here's Ryan Adams. Here's where his fan base is. This is what his social numbers look like. His audience skews 55% male, sweet spots in the 30s. They tend to be high income, like craft beer. You can see he makes, alt rock, folk rock, kind of alt country. But our AI says, if you really don't try to describe it by its sounds, but by who listens, he really makes modern alternative rock. He really makes rock for Generation Xers. He really makes rock for highly educated fans. This is the beginning of how we make those matches. If we're going to activate them live, because when we do deals, we also want tickets and live activations for the brand and VIPs and winners for that brand to meet the artist. Not that Ryan Adams I don't see as being a very brand-friendly artist, if you know what I mean, maybe for the right craft beer. But this is where he's going to be, so we know what his activations look like. And if we're interested in him for a campaign, this is where the RFP would go to tell him that we're interested in talking about something we're doing with the brand. I wanted to pull up some classical artists of the 1.8 million. There was like a lot, thousands. I said, well, show me people that are trending right now. And you can see kind of what this content looks like. There's probably some, familiar names here for you all. I didn't put much filtering on this, but the reason that this is interesting is because those people that make music at the same time are also building brands. Mm-hmm. You can make music because you love the music. You can make music for a very niche audience. You can make music for a large audience. If you're happy with your art, God bless you. But if you're going to make art for the masses, you got to be a marketer. It's like just part of the game. Like this, there's the myth of sort of the myth. I'm sure there's some that make it on talent alone, but I promise you, it takes a lot of skills to make it big as an artist. And then last but not least, there were a couple other things I wanted to share. So let me just make one other quick point. I'll kind of start to close, and then we can take some questions because I don't want to run over time. What's interesting for us as from a business perspective, and I'll go back, let's see here. So from a business perspective, I think what's fascinating about what we're doing is, and this is where I might like really take a right turn for some of you that are not thinking about the tech space. And we're building in the tech space what's called a marketplace business. And what I mean by that is we are trying to get brands to adopt this. At the same time, we get artists to adopt this. At the same time that we get publishers or media partners to adopt this. And that's a whole area of tech that's a very big space that all the best people in tech write about. That is a very, very, very regimented discipline in marketplace businesses. What I mean by that is think about Uber, if you will. If you don't have the drivers, how do you get the drivers when you don't have the riders? And how do you get the riders if you don't have the cars on the street? And so there are a lot of ways. I mean, it's a whole, like we could spend years talking about this. I've studied this for years, and I certainly am no expert on how you build these marketplace businesses. But the vision of what we're doing that we're carrying with us is we see a world where there's a lot less advertising in the way that you think about it today that's annoying, and that when you're enjoying a music experience, and music is the number one thing people do on the web, is consume music. It's like 32 hours a week. It's insane that instead of commercials, you actually get more of these music experiences. Imagine turning on the radio. People tell me all the time, well, radio's dying because it's radio and digital. No, it's very easy to get in the car and turn on the radio. It's because the radio's annoying. It's because the radio is 12 minutes of commercials screaming at you an hour, and I don't need to adopt that anymore. So we see a whole different way of marketing around music, and the real trick is how we're going to get each side to adopt at one time. Now, I'll ask a question for you all. Which side do you think is the hardest to get to adopt? Well, who's the customer in your opinion there? Huh? Easiest part. Easiest part. Like we got to beat them away like they're coming at us like locusts. Anybody else? Publishers are great too because we give them money for advertising. So that only leaves one. Can you guys get this one? Come on, Sherlock, where are you? Anybody? Would you Bueller? The brands. You have to go to a brand and say, this is a better way of spending marketing dollars. It's smarter to go to somebody that you want to win as a customer. Think about these old stodgy brands, even some of the young ones, what they're taught in sort of brand school. And rather than telling everybody how great your product is, like that's the way of 20 years ago, today, giving somebody, when they're listening to the music, a reprieve, giving them the gift of music that's targeted, that's made specifically for them, not only a great thing in creating a brand ambassador with the artist, but it's actually great for the listener. That's the thing that is going to dictate our success, is the ability to convince the world that this is better for fans and it's better for brands. The rest sort of takes care of itself. It's a pretty big ambition. We think it's a very huge space, and I've been blessed to be a part of some really great businesses. Hopefully this is a big one in the music space that you'll hear about, and people will say it's from North Texas.
Yeah.
All right, that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you.
Take some questions. Okay, on time? Any questions? Going once, going twice? Okay, we got one here. Don't be hesitant. What's your name, sir?
My name is
Jordan, very good name, very good brand name, by the way. Do you ever like stand in front of the mirror and hold up the basketball and split the legs?
I work at a restaurant, and I love being honest, and I tell people, when I greet at table, I say, my name is Jordan, like Michael Jordan, like the River Jordan, and people remember it.
I like that. And when you talk like that, they'll never have boredom.
So my question is less about like the specific parts of the business, but more of y'all's company. So I don't know what end use for this question. But I've been thinking about this recently because there was the Citigroup report that came out earlier.
Yeah, I just read it, yeah.
That said that out of like the $40 billion that the music industry generates, the actual musicians only make 10-12%.
Yeah.
Which is like almost twice as much as it was 10 years ago. So my question is, what do you think, is that the right path? Should musicians be paid more?
That's a great question and a very complex question. So Citi, just to recap, Citi they have analysts there that analyze different industries so that investors can make decisions. They just did a report on music. People are suddenly interested in music because Spotify went public. And some people, the report, some people said was a great report. Some folks said not a great report, but one of the stats that's been disputed in there is that when $1 flows in the music industry, 12% goes to the artist. Is that high or low? Or is it fair, not fair? And I guess I don't really have a great answer. Some things that I would say to you is, one problem with the music industry is there's too many middlemen. And it's just because it's the classic business that is offline that hasn't moved online. One thing has moved online, which is streaming. And I want to be careful what I say because there'll be like a record of it on the web. You make pot jokes, but I have to think carefully about how I talk about this critique of the music industry. Is that some people say that over time the role of the labels is really going to change and that more music from streaming might go directly to artists. And it's really brought up a lot of questions about what the role of the labels are. It seems like the number is a bit low, but I think some people go, well, musicians should make most of that money. I don't really know that that's the case. Should it be higher? Yes, you get rid of the middleman, it'll go up. 20, 30, 40%, I don't know. But in making music, if you think about that transformation process, there's so many people involved in the transformation process of music legitimately that aren't the musicians themselves. The person taking a ticket at a door, this person doing the sound recording, the person that's opening the building, the cost of running the studio. So there's a middleman issue. I think the bigger challenge that I'm really fascinated with is that the money that is distributed in the music industry to artists is not really well distributed. So I read a really interesting stat a couple days ago. I forgot where, I have to look it up. I don't like to just give a statistic and not recall exactly where it comes from. But some crazy number, like 85, 90% of the music industry, money or royalties that are paid out. We could talk about like the PROs and how the labels, very small segment of artists that actually get that money. And it's a real problem. Like I've talked to folks at Spotify, Troy Carter, for example, who recently left, that talked about how 250 artists, or something, some small number of artists, dominate the listening. People still go to Pandora and put on the Beyonce channel or Show Me Today's Hot Music. So the system is doing a better job of kind of introducing you to new artists, but it hasn't really changed taste. And I think the reason that occurs, there's a couple of reasons. One, which could be a really great debating point, and this is how I met my buddy George over at George Howard that I told you about at Berkeley, is I think the PRO system is not a really well thought out system. For those of you that know the publishing rights organizations and performing rights organizations with Sound Exchange, which is a whole other matter, and also I think the payola laws. I think the idea that years ago we had this intervention that said local artists or artists can't deal directly with distributors to play their music, or that's payola, it's pay to play. And I think what ended up happening is the really big guys are very good at getting their music promoted and the little ones aren't. I mean, it's really, I want you to think about how crazy this is in Texas. I like country music. There's this whole basket of really big artists in Texas that attract thousands of people. They attract more people in Texas than the people coming out of Nashville do. There's guys that play Billy Bob's every weekend and draw a crowd, and they're there week in, week out, and they can't get a song played on radio. They can't get a song at the top of a playlist in the state of Texas. Well, why is that? That doesn't seem like a really smart economy. That's part of what led us to this business, was thinking about if you've got 100 artists that you see on every brand deal, how many brands do a deal with Rihanna or Bieber or Beyonce, then what it told me was the next, what we call breakthrough artists, the ones that we work with, it's the top 3 or 4%. It's about 100,000 artists of that 1.8 million. They're really undervalued. The reason it's a great opportunity is because there are these artists that you would be, artists that you love. Think about all the artists that you love that are in your, they're on your Spotify playlist or Apple Music, if you're in Apple Music, that you're going why do I not see this artist anywhere, right? They have big shows, I see them all the time, but why don't they get promotion? It's because the system's kind of tilted against them. So I guess to short answer, the 12% number, probably low, probably middlemen related. Some very interesting conversations to be had about what the role of labels are, because labels are part of that. I think the labels actually do perform a very important function in the music industry, but that's being very hotly contested. And last but not least, I think the distribution is the real problem. I think the system of getting artists that are really on the verge of getting big promotion is sort of rigged against them, and that's the part that we'd like to fix. Any other questions?
Can you talk a little bit about the process of how artists are able to assess their brand and how they can put all of these data points together in order to connect with a potential partner or brand or anything else? What does that process look like? Do the artists that come to your company already have all of that together, or do you help them create all of that information so that you can determine that this artist is valuable and could potentially connect? What does that process look
Yeah,
like?
I would say the short answer is this is why artists, you could tell by the managers, sometimes the artists themselves, there are people like Chance that are just, Chance the Rapper, they're incredible marketers. But most of the time they need management around them that know how to work with the tools that artists use today. And there's a whole array of tools from social media all the way to analytics. Like in the marketing world, you use, like Google Analytics or Dart for tracking. There are tools like Linkfire in the music world that people use to see when somebody goes stream the song. But in terms of how we get them to prepare, I'll put you on the spot, but you deal with this every day. Can you maybe stand up and give us a cool minute answer?
Okay, so hello, everyone. I would say the first, and this also applies to like the classical side of the music industry, first and foremost, you have to be getting your music out there. So a lot of times, like if you go into our platform and even search by any artist profile, like the reason why their profiles are in our platform is because they're out there playing shows, performing, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, if we have smaller artists that like, let's say I were to pull up a local band from Denton and try to enter their name into our platform and they don't show up, it's because we really need them to be pushing towards, being on a regular routine of performing to where that exposure.
While you're doing that, I'm gonna look up the Denton bands because you just got me thinking about that.
Sure. Where exposure, Midlake's a great Denton band. You can probably look them up in there. Where that exposure through performing puts you on the map. Does that make sense? So this is really all about thinking of yourself as a brand. When it comes down to it, like, to go very quickly into my background, I nearly went to music school, almost went to UNT for music school. I ended up going into business, and one of the reasons why was because I was super into playing clarinet. I was in band all through high school. I was a drum major. I was in marching band, like you name it. Like I did it all, right? And the big thing I wanted to do was not teach. And I didn't want to teach, but I wanted to perform. And my big thing was I wanted to play in an orchestra. But in that day and age, it was very difficult for me to think about how to actually pursue that career path because it's so competitive, and how do you really like get yourself out there and get noticed to be able to become a successful performer. And so I ended up going the business route. And it really comes down to the music industry as a whole, like yourself as an individual musician, how do you market yourself as your own brand? So this is really, if you want to think of it from the artist point of view, is just getting out there and performing and taking your own data down and, reaching out to companies like us or different brands and saying, hey, this is myself as a marketable product.
Could you talk a little bit more about what that process is of compiling that data? Like what
Sure.
would those steps look like?
For the artists or for us?
For the artists.
Yeah, what would be two or three things that hygiene that's a must? By the way, to your question, to your comment, 391 artists.
So like Sarah Jaffe, she's from Denton. She's great. And she's someone that is kind of in the indie rock space. That is kind of starting to emerge nationally. I know that she started around Denton, just playing small bars and venues and gigs around here, and started reaching out to Dallas and playing out there, and just worked her way up. And I know her management very well, and this is really just about them. If we're going to talk about the process of how you compile numbers, it's compiling like how many people walk through the door for your show, right? How many people do you have on your Facebook likes, things like that, like marketing yourself as a product and taking those actual metrics down and marking them. Like I was telling Steve earlier, we have a jazz musician who reaches out to us constantly. He's a saxophonist and he plays international, and his name's Mike Casey. And his big thing is that he really wants to partner up with a luxury brand. So luxury brand, or like an airline, or like a hotel, or something like that, because there's a really, in my opinion, a big niche like of where classical meets luxury, and I think that it is kind of like the next thing, in my opinion, in terms of emerging brand partnerships. But he's self-managed, and his big thing is taking down his metrics every single performance that he plays. How many people were there? Where was it? How often have I played in this 6-month period of time? Where have I played? Just things like that,
So it's not just social media.
It's not just social media.
It's
no.
a combination.
Well, there's other things too, like there's a company, I don't think they've got a lot of traction, but like Ryan Leslie had the hip hop artist, had the Harvard grad hip hop artist, and now tech entrepreneur, did this thing called Superphone, where people say, we put out the list for the email list. Instead of signing the email list, he'd be like, yo, here's my number, text me. People text him, and it's a CRM, customer application that lives in his phone. So everybody that texts him gets an autoresponder say, hey man, put your name in my phone. And now anytime he has a release, he's hitting everybody through text. right? So it was like, how do we move that here? With Facebook, like getting likes is great, but having likes on Facebook is really great because you go look at how many people liked her. But that's not a good marketing outlet for Sarah Jaffe anymore. You know why? Because when you like something on Facebook, there's so much going through your feed, like only 1 or 2% of your followers ever see it. So you have to have micro budgets, so when you post something important, you can put $30 behind it and actually run a Facebook ad. You know how to run a Facebook ad. Instagram is really becoming the platform now. Releasing music on Instagram is, I think, going to become a thing, right? What's YouTube look like in your portfolio? Some people do it on YouTube. You don't have to be great at everything, but you've got to be great at some things, right? Some people are great at a lot of them, but there's, to your point, like live, having direct access to who your customers are, who your fans are. Social's important, knowing how social ads work. I would say, like, what's the role of YouTube? And by the way, then there's all this other stuff that I think comes into this, like who controls your publishing, how easily can you make decisions around your music and your likeness? I mean, even things like being in a band and not being in a band and how the decision-making process happens. Who's your outreach? What's your network of people that you want to market with? Are you saturating one market where you got a lot of fans? Because you always have to have a concentration in one market before you can expand it. I see people going like on tours and like they don't draw anywhere. You got to draw a lot of places, a lot of people in one place first. So but our expertise is not really like, here's how to do it. Our expertise is for the people that know how to do it. We're there to really help them get that brand deal. But it's interesting, right? Because people like Victoria and Zotz, who's works with Victoria, and George, they spent a lot of time coaching the artists on this. And I saw one of the videos of one of your speakers, husband and wife, they did the talk on social.
Media,
yeah, there's no doubt, there's like, you never stop learning, right?
And I just want to touch really quick, you mentioned the word portfolio. Portfolio is huge, especially in like the classical space. You want to be thinking of yourself as a portfolio. Like not only how often are you playing, where you're playing, but who are the types of people that are coming to your performances, age-wise, social status-wise, things like that. And this all again goes back to figuring out how to market yourself as a actual brand of your own. That's like my best recommendation for people that are emerging artists that are trying to get their foot out there that aren't backed by any type of label or publishing company. And especially in the classical music space, it's that much harder, in my opinion. But I would definitely recommend just starting to look into yourselves as far as what are your deliverable metrics, right?
Deliverable metrics.
Yeah.
That's a great term.
Any more? Going once, going twice? One thing I want to make sure that I shared with you all from a career perspective, I say this because when I was your age, heck, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I really didn't. I'm sure some of you are probably early enough in college that you're not really thinking about it yet. I mean, I'm sure you think about it, but do you think about it? Well, do you? How many of you think you have a pretty clear idea of like what you want to do after school? Just show of hands. That's pretty good. How many of you are like, well, I'm not really so sure? And like that's okay. But I'll give you a couple of tips. Like one I would say is, if you're interested in a career in music that from a business perspective, like go work in industry. And also don't think that because you work in music that you're just not going to be able to work in a very different industry. Like, do I think that you want to go be like an actuary in an insurance company? Maybe not. But there's so many things in design and in tech and in teaching and in healthcare where interesting things are happening, particularly in the tech startup space where people welcome people with different points of view. And all of the change in the music industry always comes from the outside. Like I will personally tell you the most interesting people that I've met in the music industry are the people that like came into the music industry from a completely different perspective. It's very hard to like change the music industry from the inside. I also would say to you that this whole like lecture that you hear all the time, but I really believe is true, like there are some people, there are probably a couple of you in this room that are sitting here right now and you're saying what I'm going to do is I'm going to be that next big thing in music. Right? There's probably many of you that are looking at the professorship path or the chamber or whatever, and you're going like, I'm gonna go that path, and that's great too. That's also a place where there's probably more supply. There's always more supply in music than there's demand. So you gotta, I'd say you gotta be intellectually curious, and it's hard, right? Especially if you're that passionate about music. Like I've got a son that is into really a couple of things, right? He loves culture and history, and like that's all he wants to study. But at some point, how do you not lose that rapid fire for what you're doing, but make time to make yourself well-rounded so that you can bring other perspectives? And it's also going to make your art more interesting, by the way. Like there's no doubt, like for me, I've chosen this path where I just keep jumping into these different industries because I go, if anything, I'll turn out to, I'll have had an interesting life. And so I think there's really double benefits of that. I do think there's something good to like doing, it takes a discipline, but doing really meaningful work that you love outside of the arts because of how it'll feed both the arts, feed you, if you can really manage the discipline of juggling those two things, which I don't think most people that are artists do very well. But I do think it's a very important thing. And I'd also tell you that you have to have that sense of worth. I know you go, well, I'm studying music, and maybe you don't. This guy's studying coding, or this person's studying business, and they're applying for the job, and surely that's what people want to see. You can't have that attitude, because that's not the case. I mean, I've had so many fine arts majors that have been some of the best people I've worked with in the high-tech space, but you have to have a really intellectual curiosity as to what's going on in those spaces. I tell you, if there was one thing that one of you went out and did that would really change your life, like learn to code. The whole world is becoming code. Like the best thing you can do, other than the mathematics of music, if you will, it would be the mathematics of like machine language, of like of software eating the world, and that's learn to code. Learn JavaScript or learn Python for like the data sciences. But those are things that I'll tell you, it'll change your perspective, I think, on art. I mean, I love music. I play a little music. I'm not like a super talented musician or anything, but I have no doubt that the two things will impact one another. So just keep an open mind and make sure that you keep your sense of worth, that it's not just that your art brings a lot of value to other things that people are doing that are important work. And by the way, the other thing too is networking. You gotta like really get out there and meet lots of people with different perspectives. Team up with a marketer if you're trying to brand yourself. But I tell you, like, I really recommend this to everybody. Go take interviews for internships and for jobs that you don't think you can get. And just, like, you absolutely need to put yourself out there. Everything good. Go ahead. And I'll tell you a couple crazy stories where that's impacted my life.
Yeah, I would just like to say, like, I know you guys are in school for music and things like that, but also immerse yourself in this Denton community of music. There's so much out there outside of UNT, just in Denton alone, that I highly encourage you to check out. I helped book and curate a local music festival, and that's kind of how I got my start in the music business outside of the classical world. And that was founded here and based in Denton. So I highly recommend, you guys are so fortunate enough to go to this school and also be in a community where the music scene outside of the four walls of this classroom is also very rich. So I highly recommend checking out a lot of different venues. We have if anyone's been to the Square, to like Andy's or Pascal's or whatever, freaking Jason Lee lives in Denton now. He's best friends with Midlake, who does great overseas in the Europe area, and they're a very small band that is based out of Denton. And we have a very rich arts and music community outside of the classical world, and I encourage you to go out there and just really kind of get to know it more, because you'll never know who you end up being linked up with. So.
Could you give some examples of the types of venues or festivals or organizations that they
Sure.
could seek out in this process of stepping outside?
Some of them are now defunct, I will say that. So the festival scene is on the decline a little bit here, but the arts and jazz scene is obviously huge. There's hundreds of thousands of people that come every spring for Arts and Jazz Fest. I would recommend, what are some of the good venues? Andy's is pretty all right. Just stay safe when you're over there if you haven't heard about that. Andy's, just a bunch of places around the Square. If you guys are over 21, there's always a bunch of concerts at Dan's Silverleaf. That one's a great area. There used to be this venue named Haley's, and it's called something different now, but J&J's, the basement in there, if anyone's been in that dirty ass basement downstairs at J&J's, grabbing a slice of pizza and $1 beer, there are great bands that come through that are emerging bands touring nationally. So I highly recommend just getting out there, and I just past the classical world and trying to, again, network. So this is a really great area to do that in, and that's where I found my start. So.
And networking also means, think about people that you know, through your families, that have interesting backgrounds or do interesting work. And I promise you, you think, oh, I don't have much of a network. There are people that your brothers, your older brothers or sisters, your cousins, your uncle, your parents know that do something interesting in an industry that you find interesting. I think that's a really great place to go. But it's interesting because most of the big things that have happened in my life is because I do something a little bold. There's some really pretty crazy stories of things that I've done to make things work. At the beginning of this company, I'd been thinking about launching this. I was running a company of 2,300 people, and I was literally sitting at work. Steve and I worked together, and I was thinking about this particular business. And I didn't have enough. I wasn't really sure about some of the areas of music law and the music industry that this was going to touch. And the way that I met my friend George was I was reading some articles, and he writes for like New York Times and Forbes. And at the time he was running, if any of you guys know Wolfgang's Vault or Daytrotter or Paste magazine, or he was running that group of companies. And I thought this would be a really good guy that would get my perspective based on the things that he wrote. So I called down to Pace Magazine. I called the accounts receivable department. That's where they're waiting for you to pay your bills. They always answer the phone, right? Because they're trying to collect money. And I said, hey, I'm looking for George Howard. And they must have thought I owed the company some money and I was maybe with another company. I said, can I get his cell phone? And they gave me a cell phone number, and I called them. I said, hey, I'm George. I'm Nathan Hanks. I run this public company. It's called Reach Local. I'm really thinking about doing this wild thing in the music business. And I'm getting you a ticket. I want you to come down to Dallas and meet with me. And like, he got on the plane and came down. Like, he called me the next day. He said, okay, check this out. I'm coming down. And that's kind of how we launched the business. But like, sometimes you have to put yourself out there for things. And, you know, there's nobody that really makes it big. I'm sure from a performance perspective, you look back at some of your early performances and you go like, oh my God, I wore that. I looked like that. I sounded like that. Like, everything in life is repetition, is getting those 10,000 hours in. It is. There's nobody that wakes up and I'm convinced of this, that there's 1 in 10 million that wake up and get in the front of the room and can just perform. Everything just comes with the practice and the repetition. And sometimes to break through, you got to make the bold step and you got to just like keep moving forward. And so I do know that, like, I do think that in what you do as artists, particularly the classically trained artists in the room, is that it's interesting because the stakes are very high and there's going to be a lot of challenges, but the rewards to have a great life in both business and the arts are also very, very high. And I hope you look at it as a glass half full thing.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you all so much for the time today.
Thank you. Do we have any last questions? We have a couple more minutes. So anyone has one final question, we can add that. So we have a question that someone submitted in writing. I thought we would pull this up before we leave.
Okay, a couple quick ones. I want to make sure I get y'all to lunch.
This is from Sonia. Sonia, are you here, Sonia? Yes,
Hi,
so
Sonia.
she wrote, would you consider having classical music and musicians work with Max?
Oh, of course. Of course. I mean, so if you think about our business today, we want to get to the point, and we're automating the business more, where the way our platform is going is where the brands will come in and just see what music is being released and make those matches more easily. Today we're really beholden to, we started by going to auto and beverage and industries that we know spend a lot of money on this kind of marketing. But I think if we're successful, it'll be a very big part of our portfolio. It's interesting too, because if you think about, you know, I'll say in quotes, classical music, think about how much of it shows up in the culture through advertising, through cinema. You could argue cinema is a big way that classical sounds are propagated today. So I actually think that like advertising is this massive opportunity for classical music to be discovered. So I think so. I think it's a big opportunity.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's
A question here.
So then as a business, is it really important to pull your resources in that classical genre? I mean, does it really have the commercial power behind it where it's really as cost efficient for your business?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you really think about it, if you get into like our cost structure, the music is the music is the music. If a brand comes to us and says, I need to reach, you know, X audience through this type of marketing campaign, it doesn't really affect our cost structure what type of music that we work with. What I would say though is interesting is because classical has such appeal to a small subsegment of audience that has a lot of money to spend, as this gets rolling, I would imagine that we're going to see a lot more interest because of that sort of signal. I'll just give you an example. I bet you you could name 30, 40 brands. I would sort of go like hip hop and country and electronic music or the pop music of today. Like, which of those are you really going to put with Burberry? Which of those are you going to really put with, you know, which of those are you really going to put with Mercedes-Benz, right? And there are cases where you will put them together. But yeah, I think it's very commercial, and in the cost structure, it's probably all the same.
well, thank you. Thank you
You
very
got it.
much.
Thank you guys so much.